What if the most powerful predator on Earth pretended to be completely helpless? Cassian Harrington, an immortal king hiding in plain sight, faked blindness to expose the greed of his human staff. It worked perfectly until a new Maid arrived, threatening to unravel centuries of carefully guarded secrets. Ashbourne House sat like a brooding fortress in the misty isolation of the Hudson Valley. To the outside world, it was the heavily guarded estate of Cassian Harrington, an eccentric tech and real estate billionaire who had recently suffered a tragic medical event. The official story, verified by the highly respected Dr. Arthur Pendleton of Manhattan, was that a rare and aggressive form of bilateral optic neuropathy had stripped Cassian of his sight entirely. The unofficial truth, however, was far more dangerous. Cassian Harrington was not a mere billionaire, and he was certainly not 35 years old, despite what his forged birth certificate claimed. He was a vampire, a sovereign among his kind, who had walked the earth for nearly 7 centuries. Exhausted by the endless sycophancy of his immortal court and the predictable deceit of human society, Cassian had devised a social experiment. He wanted to know how the mortals who served him would behave when they believed the master of the house was plunged into absolute helpless darkness. To sell the lie, Cassian wore custom-made opaque contact lenses, crafted in a private Swiss laboratory, giving his pale blue eyes a milky, unseeing film. But a vampire does not need human eyes to see. His heightened senses painted a vivid, omniscient picture of his surroundings. He could hear the erratic fluttering of a moth 3 rooms away. He could map the exact dimensions of a room through the subtle shifts in air pressure. Most importantly, he could hear the accelerated heartbeats of liars. And Ashbourne House was infested with them. For 6 months, Cassian played the tragic blind recluse. He sat in his heavy leather armchair in the grand study, his face impassive, while his household staff orchestrated a symphony of betrayal right in front of him. The ringleaders were his head housekeeper, Margaret Higgins, and his chief butler, Thomas Wright. Margaret, a woman in her late 50s, with a grandmotherly smile that masked a sociopathic greed, systematically looted the estate's secondary storage. Cassian would sit quietly, listening to the soft clinking of 18th-century silver spoons being slipped into her apron pockets. Thomas, a sharp-featured man with a taste for the high life, was far bolder. During evening service, Thomas would pour Cassian a glass of standard table wine, boldly uncorking a $4,000 bottle of 1990 Chateau Margaux, for himself drinking it in the very same room, while mocking Cassian with silent, exaggerated gestures. Cassian observed it all. The petty thefts, the sneering faces, the absolute lack of human decency. It confirmed everything he had come to despise about humanity. He was preparing to execute a brutal, terrifying purge of the entire staff until Clara Jenkins walked through the heavy oak doors of Ashbourne House. Clara was 24, profoundly exhausted and utterly desperate. A former nursing student, her life had derailed when her younger sister Lily was diagnosed with a rare leukemia. Drowning in medical debt from Johns Hopkins Hospital, Clara had abandoned her degree to take the highest-paying domestic job she could find. Ashbourne House offered triple the standard rate, specifically because the staff turnover was mysteriously high, and the environment was notoriously grim. On her first day, Clara was thrust into the dining room by Margaret. "The master is in a foul mood today," Margaret whispered harshly, her fingers digging into Clara's arm. "He is completely blind, but his hearing is sharp. Don't speak unless spoken to. Pour his water, serve his plate, and get out. And if you break anything, it comes out of your paycheck." Clara smoothed her black uniform, took a deep breath, and entered the cavernous dining room. Cassian sat at the head of the long mahogany table, staring blankly ahead. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched. To Clara, he looked like a tragic prince, trapped in a dark tower, breathtakingly handsome, yet radiating an aura of absolute isolation. "Your water, Mr. Harrington." Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cassian's breath hitched imperceptibly. The moment Clara had stepped into the room, his senses were assaulted by something entirely foreign in Ashbourne House. There was no spike of anxiety, no sour scent of deceit or malice. Instead, he heard a steady rhythmic heartbeat, and he caught the faint natural scent of lavender soap and clean linen. But more intoxicating than that was the scent of her blood. It was impossibly vibrant, singing in her veins, with a purity that made his dormant fangs ache against his gums. He didn't move. He simply waited to see how this new creature would betray him. Thomas was also in the room, leaning casually against a credenza, just a few feet from Cassian. As Clara poured the water, Thomas silently picked up a priceless Fabergé egg from the display shelf, caught Clara's eye, and gave her a wicked, conspiratorial wink before slipping it into his jacket pocket. Clara froze. The water pitcher trembled in her hand. She looked from the thief to her blind master, her eyes wide with shock. Cassian, using his peripheral vampire vision through the hazy contacts, watched her reaction intently. Would she look away? Would she demand a cut of the profit, as the last maid had done? Instead, Clara's heart rate spiked with fierce indignation. She slammed the heavy crystal pitcher onto the table with a loud, deliberate thud. "Thomas." Clara said, her voice ringing out in the silent room, completely ignoring Margaret's rule about silence. "I believe you accidentally placed Mr. Harrington's ornamental egg into your breast pocket while you were dusting it." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's face drained of color. Cassian's fingers tightened around the armrests of his chair. No one not in 6 months had ever spoken up for him. I have no idea what you're talking about, new girl." Thomas stammered, his heartbeat thrashing like a dying bird. "The gold one?" Clara insisted, her tone unwavering, despite the slight tremble in her hands. "It looks quite heavy. I wouldn't want it to tear the lining of your suit." Cassian tilted his head, playing the bewildered blind man perfectly. "Thomas, is there an item in your pocket?" His deep, resonant voice echoed through the room. Cornered and terrified of losing his lucrative position, Thomas hastily pulled the egg from his pocket and placed it back on the shelf. "My apologies, sir. I was merely inspecting it for tarnish and absent-mindedly pocketed it. A foolish mistake." "See that it doesn't happen again," Cassian said coldly. As Thomas scurried from the room, shooting Clara a look of pure, unadulterated venom, Clara let out a shaky breath. She finished setting Cassian's plate and turned to leave. "What is your name?" Cassian asked, his unseeing eyes tracking her exact position in the room. "Clara, sir." "Clara Jenkins," she replied. "Thank you, Clara," he murmured. It was the first time in centuries that Cassian Harrington had genuinely thanked a mortal. Life at Ashbourne House quickly became a living nightmare for Clara. By exposing Thomas, she had painted a massive target on her back. Margaret and Thomas formed a vicious alliance, against her assigning her the most grueling, degrading tasks. She was forced to scrub the grand staircases with a toothbrush polish, the extensive silver collection, late into the night, and was routinely denied her proper meal breaks. "You think you're some kind of Saviour Jenkins," Thomas hissed one afternoon, cornering her in the pantry. "You have a sick sister at Johns Hopkins. We did our background checks. You need this money to keep her breathing. If you ever interfere with our business again, I will have Margaret fire you for stealing. Who do you think the police will believe? The loyal staff of 10 years, or the desperate new girl drowning in debt?" Clara swallowed hard tears, pricking her eyes, but she held her ground. "I won't let you steal from a man who can't defend himself. He's a billionaire. He doesn't even know what he owns." Thomas sneered, stepping dangerously close. "Mind your business, or you'll be on the street by Friday." Cassian, standing in the shadowed hallway 3 doors down, heard every single word. His blood boiled. The urge to cross the distance in a fraction of a second, snap Thomas's neck, and drain him dry was overwhelming. His fangs fully descended, slicing into his lower lip. But he forced himself to breathe. He needed to see this through. He needed to know if Clara's integrity was a fleeting moment of bravery or a fundamental truth of her soul. Because of the staff's disdain for him, they increasingly shoved the responsibility of Cassian's direct care onto Clara. They hated being in the darkened, heavy-curtained rooms Cassian preferred. This arrangement suited Cassian perfectly. Over the next 3 weeks, a quiet, profound dynamic developed between the Vampire King and the mortal Maid. Clara would read to him thick, heavy volumes of history and philosophy. Unlike the previous readers who would skip pages or mockingly read in childish voices, Clara read with passion, her voice, a soothing melody that calmed the ancient predator's restless mind. She treated him not as a broken invalid, but as a man of dignity. When she cleaned his study, she meticulously explained where she was placing his items. "Your fountain pen is at 2 o'clock, relative to your notepad, Mr. Harrington. Your tea is at 10 o'clock. Cassian found himself anticipating her footsteps. He memorized the rhythm of her breathing. He studied the subtle fluctuations of her heartbeat, how it fluttered when she was nervous, how it steadied when she read to him. He was becoming utterly obsessed. The turning point occurred on a stormy Tuesday evening. Margaret, furious that Clara had managed to endure the grueling workload, decided to teach the girl a lesson, while simultaneously playing a cruel prank on Cassian. While Clara was out fetching firewood, Margaret intentionally shattered a crystal whiskey tumbler on the hardwood floor, right in the pathway between the doorway and Cassian's armchair. She didn't clean it up. Instead, she left the jagged, invisible shards scattered across the dark wood, intending for Clara to be blamed when the blind master inevitably stepped on them and injured himself. Cassian, sitting by the unlit fireplace, heard the glass break. He smelled the residual scent of Margaret's cheap perfume as she scurried away. He knew exactly where the glass was. He waited, his anger simmering into a cold, lethal rage. 10 minutes later, Clara entered the room, her arms loaded with heavy oak logs. The room was illuminated only by the faint, grey light of the storm outside. "I have your firewood, Mr. Harrington," Clara announced, stepping over the threshold. Cassian turned his head. "Bring it here, Clara." Clara took 2 steps forward. In the dim light, she couldn't see the transparent shards. Her foot came down directly onto a large piece of broken crystal. Because she was wearing thin standard-issue cloth slippers, the glass sliced effortlessly through the sole and deep into the heel of her foot. Clara gasped, dropping the firewood with a loud clatter. She stumbled, falling hard onto her knees, and immediately cried out in pain as more shards bit into her palms. Instantly, the heavy metallic scent of fresh blood hit the air. Cassian's reaction was involuntary. The beast inside him roared to life. His eyes flared a brilliant, terrifying crimson beneath the milky contacts. His fangs elongated. The smell of her blood was intoxicating, a rich, potent vintage that overwhelmed his senses. For a terrifying second, he was no longer Cassian the eccentric billionaire. He was an apex predator, staring at wounded prey. He rose from his chair, his movements preternaturally smooth. "Clara?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady, though his throat burned with thirst. "What happened?" Clara was gasping, fighting back tears of pain. But even in her agony, her first thought was not for herself. "Stop, don't move, Mr. Harrington!" she cried out desperately, holding up a bloody hand as if to shield him. "There's broken glass everywhere. Please stay exactly where you are. You'll cut your feet." Cassian froze. The hunger that had been clawing at his mind suddenly evaporated, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering shock. She was bleeding. She was in agonizing pain. And yet she was trying to protect him. "I'm bleeding," Clara managed to say, her voice shaking as she pulled a piece of glass from her palm. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll clean it up immediately. I must have dropped a glass earlier. No, I didn't, but I will handle it. Just don't step forward. Ignoring her plea, Cassian navigated the room deliberately, walking around the microscopic shards he could clearly see until he reached her. He knelt beside her on the floor. "Give me your hands," he commanded softly. "Sir, you'll get blood on your suit. Give me your hands, Clara." Trembling, she placed her bleeding hands into his. Cassian's skin was ice-cold, a stark contrast to the burning heat of her wounds. He felt the warm, sticky lifeblood coating his fingers. Every instinct screamed at him to bring her hands to his mouth to taste her. It required a level of self-control he hadn't exercised in centuries, to simply pull a pristine silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently, meticulously wrap it around her deepest cut. "I have you," Cassian whispered, his voice vibrating with an intensity that made Clara's breath hitch. Without warning, he slid one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back, lifting her effortlessly into the air. Clara gasped, her arms instinctively flying around his neck. "Mr. Harrington, how did you know exactly where I was? How are you avoiding the glass?" she asked, bewildered, as he carried her flawlessly out of the study and down the long shadowed corridor toward the private bathrooms. "A heightened sense of space, Clara. When you lose one sense, the others compensate." He lied smoothly, though his dead heart was beating for the first time in an age. As he set her gently onto the marble counter of the bathroom to tend to her foot, Clara looked at his face. Despite the milky lenses, she felt an intense, piercing weight in his gaze. "You shouldn't be treating me like this," Clara whispered, looking down at her ruined, bloody stockings. "I'm just a maid. Margaret will be furious." Cassian paused, holding her injured foot in his cold, powerful hands. He looked up directly into her eyes. "Margaret Higgins is no longer a concern," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, silken register. "Because by tomorrow morning, there are going to be some very drastic changes in this house." The following morning, Ashbourne House was draped in a tense, suffocating silence. Clara limped into the grand kitchen, her foot heavily bandaged, dreading Margaret's inevitable wrath regarding the blood-stained hallway. Instead, she found the kitchen completely deserted. No pots clanging, no servants whispering. The immense estate felt entirely hollowed out. Confused, Clara made her way toward the main foyer, leaning heavily on the walls. When she reached the grand entrance, she froze. Margaret Higgins and Thomas Wright stood by the heavy oak doors, clutching their severance envelopes. They were flanked by two armed security contractors from Aegis Defense Solutions. Dr. Arthur Pendleton, Cassian's supposed ophthalmologist, stood nearby holding a thick ledger. Cassian himself was seated in his usual leather armchair in the adjoining parlor, but his posture was entirely different. The aura of the helpless blind man had vanished, replaced by the terrifying, commanding presence of a sovereign king holding court. Margaret was sobbing uncontrollably, her face blotchy and pale. "Mr. Harrington, please, 10 years of loyal service. You cannot simply throw me onto the street without a reference. The police outside. You are pressing charges for a few misplaced silver spoons. You are a billionaire. This is absolute madness. A billionaire who demands absolute loyalty. Margaret." Cassian replied, his voice a low, lethal hum that vibrated through the floorboards. Clara watched in absolute shock as Cassian reached up and deliberately pinched the bridge of his nose. Slowly he opened his eyes. The milky opaque film was entirely gone. His irises were a sharp, piercing crystal blue. He looked directly at Margaret, then at Thomas, his gaze tracking their every microscopic movement. "I saw everything," Cassian stated softly. The collective gasp in the room was deafening. Thomas staggered backward, his expensive stolen shoes scuffing the marble floor. You are not blind," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound terror and disbelief. "You lied to us. For 6 months, You sat there and watched us." Cassian stood up. The sheer physical power radiating from him was suffocating. He moved with the lethal grace of an apex predator, stepping within inches of the cowering butler. "I wanted to see the true nature of the creatures residing in my home," Cassian said, his eyes darkening to a dangerous shade. "And you, Thomas, have proven to be the most utterly vile parasite of them all. You preyed upon my supposed weakness, and you attempted to destroy an innocent woman just to protect your petty thievery." "Doctor." Pendleton stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "The authorities have a complete inventory of the stolen assets, Mr. Wright. The 1990 Chateau Margaux alone constitutes grand larceny. We have recovered the Fabergé egg you pawned at Sotheby's. You will be facing up to 15 years in a federal penitentiary." Thomas fell to his knees, begging, but the Aegis contractors stepped forward, hauling both him and the weeping housekeeper out the front doors. As the heavy doors slammed shut, Cassian turned his penetrating gaze toward the hallway. He knew exactly where Clara was hiding, his heightened senses locked on to her rapid heartbeat. "You can come out now, Clara," Cassian called out smoothly. Clara stepped into the light, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Her mind was reeling. The master of Ashbourne House was not a helpless invalid. He was a terrifyingly observant mastermind who had orchestrated an elaborate psychological trap. You can see," Clara stammered, gripping the banister for support. "Everything. The glass on the floor. Thomas stealing the egg. You saw it all." Cassian closed the distance between them in the blink of an eye, a movement so unnaturally fast it made Clara gasp in shock. "I saw humanity at its absolute lowest," Cassian murmured, his gaze dropping to her heavily bandaged foot. "And then I saw you, a woman drowning in medical debt for her sister at Johns Hopkins, surrounded by thieves and liars, who still chose to throw herself onto broken glass to protect a man she believed was utterly defenseless. You sacrificed your own physical well-being for a total stranger." Clara looked up into his ancient, piercing eyes, feeling an inexplicable pull. "Why did you pretend?" she asked softly. "Because when you possess endless power and endless time, the only thing of actual value left in this world is genuine truth." Cassian gently reached out his cold fingers, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "And you, Clara Jenkins, are the most truthful creature I have encountered in 700 years. Clara blinked, her mind snagging on his bizarre phrasing. 700 years, she repeated, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Mr. Harrington, you are 35. Cassian's lips curved into a sad, knowing smile. "My birth certificate is a flawless forgery created by a contact at the Department of Homeland Security." Cassian confessed, his voice dropping to a hypnotic whisper. "I am significantly older than I appear, Clara. The world is much darker and vastly more complicated than you have been led to believe. I brought you here to test my staff, but you ended up testing me. You awakened something inside my chest that I assumed had perished centuries ago." Clara stared at him, mesmerized by the strange magnetic energy pulling her closer to this dangerous, beautiful, and utterly unpredictable man. The boundaries of her reality were fracturing, yet she had never felt safer in her entire life. The following weeks blurred the lines of reality for Clara. With the treacherous staff removed, Cassian hired a private chef and a discreet cleaning crew, ensuring Clara never lifted a finger again. Instead of a maid, she became his confidant, his companion, and the absolute center of his dark, isolated world. Cassian revealed his true nature to her one rainy afternoon in the library. He didn't just tell her, he showed her. He crushed a solid marble paperweight into dust with a single hand and moved across the room faster than human eyes could process. He was a vampire. Instead of fleeing in terror, Clara felt a strange, profound sense of peace. The puzzle pieces finally fit together. His ice-cold skin, his avoidance of sunlight, his supernatural hearing, it all made perfect sense. "Are you going to hurt me?" she had asked, her voice steady. Cassian had dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her hands. "I would burn the entire world to ash before I let a single scratch touch your skin again," he vowed, and he proved it. A week later, Cassian utilized his immense wealth and immortal influence to completely change her life. He contacted Dr. Harrison Bennett, the chief of oncology at Mount Sinai Hospital, leveraging a massive anonymous donation to secure experimental, groundbreaking treatments for Clara's sister Lily. But Cassian went a step further. Under the cover of darkness, he visited Lily's hospital room. He didn't turn her into a monster. Instead, he introduced a microscopic drop of his own immortal blood into her IV line. The ancient regenerative properties of the Vampire King's blood attacked the leukemia cells with ruthless efficiency. Within 3 days, Lily's doctors were completely baffled by a miraculous, unprecedented, and total remission of her aggressive cancer. Clara wept tears of absolute joy when she received the phone call from Mount Sinai. She ran through the sprawling halls of Ashbourne House, throwing herself into Cassian's arms. "She's cured, I don't know how, but she is completely cured." Clara sobbed against his chest. Cassian held her tightly, his chin resting on top of her head, allowing her to believe it was a medical miracle. He would tell her the truth about his intervention eventually, but for now, seeing the agonizing weight of the world finally lifted from her shoulders was the greatest reward he could ever experience. That evening, Cassian led Clara to the estate's sprawling greenhouse, a massive glass structure filled with blooming midnight orchids and rare nocturnal flora. The moonlight filtered through the glass roof, casting a breathtaking ethereal glow over them. "Clara," Cassian began, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in centuries. "I have walked through human history, watching empires rise and fall. I have seen the absolute worst of mankind. I believed my heart was permanently calcified. But your bravery, your unwavering kindness in the face of immense cruelty, brought me back to the light. You saved me from an eternity of bitterness." He reached into his pocket and produced a velvet box. Inside rested a magnificent, flawless diamond ring, a historical artifact that had once belonged to French royalty. "I do not want you as my maid, and I do not merely want you as my companion," Cassian said, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "I want you as my equal, my partner, my queen. I can offer you eternity, Clara. I can give you a love that will literally outlast the stars. Will you stay with me in this life, and in whatever comes after?" Clara looked down. She saw the breathtaking ring, then looked up into the desperate, hopeful eyes of the immortal king. She thought of the cold, miserable life she had led just a few months ago, and the vibrant, passionate, and secure world Cassian had given her. He was a predator to the world, but to her he was an absolute protector. "Yes," Clara whispered, a radiant smile breaking across her face as she reached out to touch his cold, marble-like cheek. "I will stay with you, Cassian. Forever." Cassian slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing their immortal pact with a kiss. Their embrace was passionate, a collision of warm human fragility and cold immortal strength. The shadows of Ashbourne House, once oppressive and terrifying, now felt like a comforting protective blanket wrapping around them. The billionaire king had successfully purged his kingdom of deceit, finding the single radiant gem hidden in the dirt. Cassian Harrington had faked his own blindness to expose the absolute worst in humanity, but in doing so, he had miraculously stumbled upon its absolute best. He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of lavender and life, vowing to protect her from any looming threat, mortal or immortal, guarding her fiercely until the very end of time itself. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the impossible steady rhythm of a vampire's beating heart. It was a heartbeat that belonged entirely to her. In the heart of the Hudson Valley, the Dark King had finally found his eternal light, and he would never let the darkness touch her bright, beautiful soul again. Did this dramatic twist leave you completely breathless? If you loved watching Cassian expose his greedy staff and find his eternal queen in Clara, hit that like button right now. Share this story with friends who crave dark romance. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling supernatural tales. What would you do if your boss was a vampire? Comment down below and let us know.